Chapter 5. The Global Context of Business. The global market has evolved into major world marketplaces, held together by trade agreements and alliances. A number of factors affect how countries and businesses respond to the international environment. Further, managers and entrepreneurs find themselves challenged by a number of factors that influence their international involvement. In this chapter, we discuss the overall dynamic nature of international business and explain how it is shaped by social, cultural, economic, legal, and political differences among nations. We look at the rise of international business and describe the major world marketplaces. We then look at the factors involved in deciding to do business internationally and in selecting the appropriate levels of international involvement and international organizational structure. We also discuss how differences in import-export balances, exchange rates, and foreign competition determine the ways in which countries and businesses respond to the international environment. Finally, we look at barriers to international trade and the free trade agreements that have been developed to overcome these barriers. The learning objective of today's lesson is that at the end of this lesson, you will be able to describe the growing complexity in the global business environment and identify the major world marketplaces. Identify the evolving role of emerging markets and highlight the important role of the BRICS nations. Explain how different forms of competitive advantage, import-export balances, exchange rates, and foreign competition determine the ways in which countries and businesses respond to the international environment. You will also be able to discuss the factors involved in deciding to do business internationally and in selecting the appropriate levels of international involvement and international organizational structure. Describe some of the ways in which social, cultural, economic, legal, and political differences act as barriers to international trade. Explain how free trade agreements assist world trade. The contemporary global economy. Globalization means that more and more firms are engaging in international business. The world volume is large and growing. It is important to understand the potential of the global economy and its effects on Ontario, Canada's growth. The economy is becoming less fragmented and more of a single market network. This means that it is important for firms to have a presence beyond Canadian borders. Canada, itself, is a small and limiting market. The real rewards for Canadian business lie outside the nation. As the world becomes more globalized, the number of imports, goods that are produced and grown abroad and shipped into Canada, and exports, goods that are produced or grown in Canada but shipped abroad, will continue to increase. International trade is not a new concept, yet it is increasingly becoming central to the fortunes of most nations and their businesses. The major world marketplaces. Distinctions are made between countries based on per capita income. The World Bank classifies countries into high income, upper middle income, lower middle income, and low income. 1. Distinctions based on wealth. The World Bank uses per capita income to make distinctions between four kinds of countries: high income, upper middle income, lower middle income, and low income. 2. Geographic clusters. The contemporary world economy revolves around three major marketplaces that represent the home to most of the world's largest economies, biggest multinational corporations, most influential financial markets, and highest income consumers. A. North America. This is the single largest marketplace and enjoys the most stable and sound economy. B. Europe, has evolved into a unified marketplace through the European Union. C. Pacific Asia. The Pacific Asia economies grew rapidly in the 1970s and 1980s and are now an important force in the world economy and a major source of competition for North American firms. B. Emerging markets, BRICS and beyond. 5 countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are increasingly important in world trade. Each of these countries has somewhat different strengths. C. Forms of competitive advantage. No country can produce all the goods and services that its people need, so countries tend to export those things that they can produce better or less expensively than other countries. 1. Absolute advantage exists when one country can produce something more cheaply than any other country. 2. Comparative advantage exists when a country can produce certain goods more efficiently or better than other goods. 3. National competitive advantage. This idea has become a widely accepted model of why nations engage in international trade, derives from 4 conditions: factors of production, demand conditions, related and supporting industries, and strategies, structures, and rivalries. International competitiveness refers to the ability of a country to generate more wealth than its competitors in world markets. D. The balance of trade. A country's balance of trade is the difference in value between its total exports and its total imports. A favorable balance of trade means that a country exports more than it imports, and an unfavorable balance of trade means that a country imports more than it exports. Canada's overall trade balance is generally favorable, very favorable with the U.S., but unfavorable with its other major trading partners. E. The balance of payments. A country's balance of payments is the difference between money flowing into the country and money flowing out of the country as a result of trade and other transactions. Canada has had an unfavorable balance of payments for many years. F. Exchange rates. An exchange rate is the rate at which a currency of one nation can be exchanged for that of another. The effect of fluctuations in the exchange rate is discussed in terms of balance of trade. For instance, when value of the Canadian dollar depreciates, then exports increase and import cost more. When value of the Canadian dollar appreciates, then exports decrease and import cost less. The significance of exchange rates is also discussed in terms of how fluctuations affect demand for companies that conduct international operations. Companies that conduct international operations must watch exchange rate fluctuations very carefully because these changes can affect foreign demand for their products. The exchange rate for the Canadian dollar has fluctuated greatly during the last decade, and this has influenced exports to, and imports from, the U.S.